Welcome to the Deployed Podcast, where strategy, ideas, and capital come to life.
Hey everyone, thanks for join us for another episode of Deployed. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Kieris. I'm a real estate investor and fund operator. Over the years, I've worked with a wide range of investors who have built success in very different ways, business owners, professionals, and operators, many of whom eventually start to ask the same question. Is there a smarter way to deploy capital, especially retirement capital, outside of the stock market? So on Deployed, I'm not here to pitch. I'm here to understand how successful people think about capital, risk, long-term decisions, and to explore how tools like the self-directed IRA may fit into that thinking. All right, today I'm joined by Tony Dixon. He's a forward-thinking leadership development and organizational effectiveness consultant with 10 plus years of experience designing and delivering enterprise-wide talent strategies across healthcare, nonprofit, and academic institutions. Welcome, Tony. How are you today?
Good, man. Thank you for having me. I feel blessed.
Well, man, I appreciate you taking the time, man. I'm really excited to get into this. So before we talk investing, I would like some context. What did your path of success look like? Tell us about that.
It was kind of a twisted up question mark. My first sort of job working, I was probably about 9, 10 years old. And I was literally, at the time, I was living in Oklahoma in a trailer park. It was like 6 of us living in a mobile home together. And we didn't really have too much. My dad was the only person working in the house. And so I would literally follow the trash guy around, and he would like give me an envelope with a few bucks and I would help him out. And like that was my first way of really earning money for myself.
Wow.
And one of the things that really ended up kind of defining the way I thought about money for the rest of my life happened out of that. My cousin, who lived right behind us, his mom would take him to the mall to go shopping for school clothes each year. And that wasn't a reality for us. And one time I went with them to the mall. They were doing their clothes shopping. I had a few bucks I'd been saving up from the work I'd been doing. And I remember seeing this t-shirt that I wanted and just realizing I could buy this with my own money that I've earned.
Mm-hmm.
And making that purchase, that sense of pride, even though it was something small and symbolic at the time, that shirt ended up representing something really important of being willing to put in the work, make the sacrifice, save a little bit, finding something that you would really value and appreciate, and being able to do that on your own terms. And so that ended up really helping shape my mindset around money for the whole rest of my life that really still continues with me to this day.
I love it.
Yeah, going forward, I just continue to stay interested in business and investing. It was just a topic of interest. I ended up getting into this like ROP program, this like regional occupational program in high school for kind of low income families. And they taught us about investing. This is back when people would follow stocks in the newspaper, and we would go look up stocks in the newspaper, create like a mock portfolio and track our stocks. We learned about interviewing and resume writing, all these fundamentals to help you be successful. I'd go to bookstores on the weekends as a teenager, and I'd be looking up business and investing books, magazines, real nerdy stuff that like a 16, 17-year-old kid probably wasn't doing. And then I continued that in my college years, learning about stuff, starting to dabble in investing when I could, starting really small because I didn't have much, and then just really kind of built and grew from there, from continuing to educate myself and then getting experience, figuring out what my goals were, and just continuously evolving over time until I'm where I'm at now.
I love that. I love that. And what are you doing now exactly? What do you have going on?
So my full-time work is I do leadership development consulting in the healthcare space and been doing that for some time. And I love that sort of work. And outside of that, in terms of investments, most of our investments have really kind of been pared down. And we're mostly right now focused on paying down our mortgage. So we realized after selling off some other investments a few years ago, we said, look, this is really kind of our only big thing that we have. If we really put all this money towards it, we could get this thing paid down pretty quickly with where we are. And at that point, basically, we'd be by our mid 40s. We would be mortgage free. We'd have some passive income coming in each month to where at that point, if we really wanted to, we could decide to not work anymore and like really be able to retire in our mid 40s, but then choose to work. And so that would also represent a fundamental shift in our whole lifestyle where work becomes optional at that point. You're really doing it because you want to, and having that sort of financial independence and freedom. So that's really our mission at this point. Once we get there, I'll probably go back to investing just because I find it enjoyable and fun. But for right now, we're very much on a mission.
I love it. I love it. So as you became more successful, how did your thought about capital evolve?
Yeah. So I think one of the things was I mostly had really thought of investing around traditional stuff, stocks, CDs, mutual funds, stuff like that. You put it in a market and you hope that it'll grow. Here, the market typically returns about maybe 9 to 11% a year, give or take, depending on how much you're trying to stock pick and, read the tea leaves. But if you just throw it like in a general index fund and kind of leave it there, you'll probably get a pretty decent return. It'll compound over the years. And over the years, I learned about other stuff, whether it was options and trying stuff like that, angel investing. I have invested in a couple of companies there, real estate, getting involved with that, and really looking at passive income becoming a bigger thing personally. And then also just looking at tax advantages. And so that's one of the big things right now with paying down the mortgage is I can look on the schedule to see over the whole life of that loan, every payment at our interest rate, how much of that would go towards interest. And so if I make an extra payment, I pay that down faster, I can go and very clearly calculate how much actual money did that save me in interest that I would have otherwise had to pay. And that to me, I look at that as a return on investment because that's money I'm not going to have to pay. And you don't get taxed on money you save. So I look at it and I say, that is a guaranteed tax-free return on investment that once I pay that off and I get that to zero, that will continue to basically benefit me for the rest of my life that I stay in this house because that will free up additional cash flow every month that I'm not having to make. And mortgage is typically people's biggest expense that they have.
Nah, I
So,
love the way you're thinking about that. I remember you sharing that with me when we spoke earlier. That's a unique and cool way to think about it. I love it. And, once you pay that off, you have the choice to pull out all that equity and dump it into something else if you wanted to, which is pretty cool. What do you think separates people who accumulated capital from those who actually deploy it well?
well, I mean, I think probably the biggest thing is for me, I would say twofold. One is understanding what it is you really want for your money, because money fundamentally it's a tool. It serves this utilitarian purpose. Like it can be used to entrap folks, through debt and other things where people get addicted to purchasing stuff and they get to where they have a hard time even controlling that and realize they're putting themselves in a worse financial position. So it can serve that as a role for folks. It can serve something that provides security for someone. And so maybe accumulating quite a bit of it and putting it in really safe things where it gives them that peace of mind is worth it. For some, they built up a level of comfort or they have a certain risk tolerance based on their life, what they want to do. So I think knowing what you really want, what your goals are, and kind of what money represents for you, which I would say one of the books that really explains that very well is The Psychology of Money that came out a few years ago. I read that, really loved it.
Love it.
And this isn't like a sponsored thing. I don't know the person, don't get anything back from it, but it was just a book that when I read it, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. It reflected a lot of the ways that I thought about stuff. And I thought he did a really good job of explaining it. So knowing what you want. And then secondly, just risk tolerance, what you're comfortable doing because you might not be familiar with angel investing. It might be too long term of a commitment for you. You might think to yourself, I got to put too much up. You got to be a big, serious, fancy investor, which you don't actually have to be, or you may just really be into certain things. Like, I really want cash flow. I'm going to focus on dividend stocks, or I want to do real estate, but I don't want to tie all that money up. And there's a lot of stuff that can happen. Are there other ways I can invest in real estate without actually buying physical real estate myself directly? It's a, yeah, goals become a really important thing, and then that really informs what you do with that.
I love it. I love it. I love it. How do you personally think about risk today versus earlier in your career?
When I was younger, everything felt kind of risky because, I was just starting out, didn't have a lot to work with. And so last thing you want to do is like lose whatever small amount you've kind of gained because it took so much to get to that point. And that really affects your mindset of, shoot, I've got this. I don't want to let go of it. But simultaneously, the things that got you where you are won't necessarily get you where you want to go. And so it's being able to acknowledge that and say, hey, let's celebrate that win. And also, what's the next level for you? What does that mean for you? So for me, when it came to risk, it was, okay, I got some experience doing these things, like investing in the stock market. I got a chance to learn, like I've read some other books that really broke down the history and the track record of like index funds and how if you're going to invest in the stock market, you're more than likely better off just putting your money into like an index fund, like an SPY or, one of these big ones from Vanguard that has a low expense ratio, follows the market, gets a pretty consistent return rather than trying to go in and pick stocks and say, I'm gonna pick the big ones, Tesla, Microsoft, Apple, the ones I've heard of, because your odds of being better than the market are just not that great. Even for really experienced investors, they've done studies on it and found they usually underperform just literally throwing a dart. So we kind of fool ourselves into thinking if I just know enough, then maybe I can be that one with that big win. So in terms of my own views on risk, I say I've learned about stocks. I've done some of that. I've won some, I've lost some. I realize now if I want to go there, here's a strategy that I'm going to use because it's what works for me. And I don't have to invest a lot of mental power, spending time looking at charts and following all that. I can free that time up and I can then use that brain power for something else. So if I do want to do something like angel investing and support a startup that I think is really cool that I want to get behind, I can spend more time looking into that to make sure if that's a right fit for me or anything else I might want to do, real estate, whatever that is. So the risk shifts because you've built up enough understanding and experience with one thing that it no longer becomes risky. And you can now start to pursue other things that before were out of your realm because you've kind of freed yourself up to start doing that. And then over time, with more experience and education, those also become less risky as you understand what you're investing in. And that's probably for me, the number one thing is just avoiding getting involved in stuff that you don't really understand. And that's really probably Warren Buffett's number one thing with investing. He talked a lot about intrinsic value and when they make investments, going in and really investigating that company big. Of course, they're making multi-billion dollar investments in companies. It's different than your, typical person who's living in the suburbs. It's, working 9 to 5, trying to save for retirement. But the concept is very similar of understanding what you're investing in because it's your money. And so
Absolutely.
I try to apply that same concepts personally where I can within reason.
I love it. I love it. And how about liquidity? Does that play an important
Mm,
role in where you are? How
yeah.
important is that for you for predictability?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us right now, we keep a fairly small amount in just our regular ongoing like checking and savings account, between my wife and I. And so, we might have a few $1,000s in there as stuff throughout the month. We have outside of our main bank we use, we have a separate bank where we have a high yield savings account and we have an emergency fund that sits there. And so we've got enough money to cover a few months worth of expenses outside of the passive income we have coming in. So that if for whatever reason both of us were to lose our jobs, we've got a runway for a little while. It's sitting there in cash. It's pretty easy to pull out. But meanwhile, it's sitting there. I think right now, with where interest rates are, it's still collecting somewhere around like 4%, 3.5%, 4% interest, as a
Wow.
high
And
yield
a
savings
high
account.
yield savings? Wow. I
I
wouldn't
think
think you would
somewhere
get that
around
much.
that. Yeah, I mean, at the highest point a couple years ago, when interest rates were really high, it was paying like no joke, like around 5.5% interest on a savings account. And this wasn't requiring having like a $10,000, $20,000 minimum. This was like, I want to say like $100 or maybe $1,000. Like it was pretty accessible if you were just putting some money into a savings. And so we went with them. It's worked really well. We even got some money back from our taxes this year. We put that money there. And so that helps us with the liquidity piece for what we need. Outside of that, we're pretty much putting all of our other money into our house right now.
Oh, okay. Cool, cool, cool. And then at this stage, what kind of investments don't interest you anymore?
I don't know if there's any particular investment that. Well, okay, I guess there are some that don't really interest me anymore. One is crypto. Just from all the stuff that I've seen and everything else, personally, there's way too much volatility and uncertainty of the fundamentals underlying it. Even something like Bitcoin. And I know there's a lot of strong opinions, different sides. I'll steer clear of all that, but just the fundamentals of like what exactly it is and its use case and all that. And for some, they even have like an ethical piece of it of how it's been used for, black market stuff and money laundering and different things like that. Some, ethically don't support it. But I think even just from like a finance and investing standpoint, um, for me, it's not something that I would get back involved with. I've done some of it before. I don't have any intentions of going back to that. I think another class that came up and kind of came and went pretty quickly, but is kind of worth calling out is like NFTs. They kind of followed something similar where it was a big thing,
Yeah, that was a
which kind
big
of
thing. I don't hear about NFTs anymore at all. You're right.
yeah, yeah. They kind of came and went, and for me, it's kind of similar in a way with cryptocurrencies, where the fundamentals, it's really, there's so much speculation in both of those asset classes. And so the fundamentals of like, okay, if you were to have something happen to a big staple brand like Apple, what's still there? Well, Apple still has products. They still have buildings, they still have equipment, they still have things with intrinsic value that they could use. With other stuff, it's like a crypto or NFT where it's like a purely digital thing. It's not tied directly towards anything else. Then if something were to happen, I mean, we've seen Bitcoin recently was up over 100 grand, and it dropped down to like 60 something recently, 67, below 70,000. So if people had bought up there, they just very quickly within a matter of weeks saw their investment drop 30, 40%. And then it's kind of recovered some, but not all the way. And so even the biggest player out there is still subject to a tremendous amount of volatility. So for me, it's just that's outside of what I would want to do. Even if I had the risk tolerance for it, and could afford to kind of play with that money. I just I don't like playing with my money that way. It's the same reason why I don't go to the casino. I'd rather just go buy drinks instead of try to play and get free drinks. The drinks are going to be weak anyways. I'm probably going to spend less on the drinks if I just buy the drinks myself. And I'm happy to sit at home and play cards and have fun. I'll play cards with you all night. That's no big deal. I just don't want to feel like I'm an idiot in there, like giving away my money to get some watered down drinks. That's all.
Yeah,
You know,
casino is
to
hard
each
for me
their
too,
own.
man. To each their own. I couldn't do it either. So how do you decide when something's worth your attention?
Yeah. I mean, the philosophy I've had for a long time is create the life you've always wanted. So ultimately, whatever ends up getting my attention has to help support that some way. So, what is the life that I really want? What I really want is I want the freedom to do things because I want to do them on my terms. And so that means having financial independence. So if there's something that's going to help me get closer towards financial independence, whether that is, you know, kind of happens one of two ways, right? Like you reduce your expenses so you have free up more cash flow, or you increase the amount of money that you're bringing in. Like it's a very simple equation. It's just, ins and outs. That's the one thing that I love about finance is fundamentally it's really, really easy to understand. It's ins and outs. So if it helps me lower my debt and bring that down, or it helps me increase the amount of money I'm bringing in, especially if it's passive and I don't have to, it's not tied towards my work into it, then great. And then it's a matter of how reliable is that? How much can I count on that? Because there's so much and it continues to grow throughout the years. So many different scams and ways for people to be parted from their money. And it really breaks my heart when you see people that are like good, honest people that are, out there working, putting in a lot of freaking work, trying to take care of their family. They see something that looks like it's promising or encouraging. They put some money into it, hoping that, hey, this might allow me to, buy this car for my daughter. She's turned 16 or whatever. And I'm just trying to make a few $1,000. And then it turns out it ends up being a scam and they lose all their money and they don't have it. Like that's crushing for someone. And those sort of things happen, So that's what I end up looking for. Does it help me reduce debt, or does it help me bring in more money in terms of how I'm using things interest wise? Outside of that, of course, how stable what that track record is like. Those are things that really bring me. The probably last thing is just, do I care about it at all? Is there anything that I care about? Like I like Starbucks. Okay, well, I've invested in Starbucks before because I also get the psychology that if you invest in the things that you use, especially if a lot of other people use them, again, kind of going back to Warren Buffett, he used Gillette
Yep.
as an example of that, of like razors. He's like, look, no matter what, men are going to shave, like people will shave. There's a recurring demand no matter what. Even if you have a recession, the economy goes down, people will still be shaving and doing things like that. There's a built-in fundamental demand. That's really stable, and that's where the things that tend to be the most valuable from an investing standpoint are sometimes the least sexy stuff, like razors and chocolates and that sort of thing. Investing in boring is usually one of the best strategies. Doesn't make so great for TikTok and influencer culture, but if you're wanting to build long-term, consistent wealth, investing in boring has a pretty darn good track record, man.
I love it. I love it. So switching gears a little bit, the self-directed IRA, do you have one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have one? Awesome. Curious, how did you first learn about it?
Yeah, I forget how I first learned about it, but essentially, I remember we were talking about this last week, and I even said to you, I'm like, maybe there's stuff I'm missing, but from what I had understood, it was like okay, people have IRAs, maybe you get set up with like your job because you can kind of do the similar with like a 401k with like a, how that's invested or IRA. So I kind of talk about them like similarly in that sense. Conventionally, people just be by default put into some fund, like maybe a retirement fund. Hey, you're going to retire by 2045, 2050, something like that. And we're just going to put it there and it'll get progressively more and more conservative as you get closer to that retirement age. And people will set it and forget it, never do anything about it. And I'm someone that I want to know where the heck my money's going. So I like to go in, yeah, what do you got my money sitting in? Is it all sitting in cash? I'm actually losing money because of inflation. What's going on? And so I would go in and then talk with other people about how you can go in and select your own investments. And, each one set up a little bit different in terms of how many options and what all you can do. Of course, like some I think you can put some towards like crypto, like some might be more limited. Just kind of depends on who the provider is and what they have structured, but being able to go in and say, all right, I want to pick this fund. I think typically what I've seen, tell me if I'm wrong, but typically what I've seen with like on the IRA 401k side, it's typically more like funds rather than like individual stocks that usually someone can pick. Maybe there's an option, I just haven't seen it, but most of the stuff I've seen is more like funds. You can pick small cap or large index or, international stuff or different sort of funds that might be out there. You can kind of pick a mix. So that's usually what I've done is go in there and kind of pick mixes. And since for where we are now, our retirement income is less of a question, I usually go in and pick the stuff that has like the highest risk because I'm able to take on that risk tolerance. And so I do, especially since some of that is coming from the employer. So if they're kicking in some money and I can leverage that to get even more money and have tax benefit, hey, put me in, coach. I'm ready.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So the self-directed IRA, what I really appreciate it and why people tend to leverage it once they understand it is it gives you the option to invest in the alternatives, right? So you talked a lot about the stock market and Warren Buffett's approach and value-based investing and investing in things that make sense. And, you might want to look at indexes and things like that. But there are some people that say, you know what, I want to invest in real estate. Or
Mm,
I want to loan to this guy that's running his own independent fund. And when they go to approach their 401k or the custodian that's managing their 401k, that custodian or someone at Merrill Lynch will say, oh no, you can't invest in that, right?
right.
So they develop this self-directed IRA, which allows you to direct,
Okay.
similar to yourself, just they use the word alternatives, but it's really assets or things outside of the stock market. So
Okay.
that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy it, right? Because it gives people the opportunity to lend to someone like myself. And then the tax benefits that come with it. When you hear self-directed, what questions or concerns come up for you?
I mean, all those pieces you just mentioned about being able to invest outside of those traditional things, I wasn't even familiar with. So, I mean, I really wasn't. So I certainly would be curious to hear more about that. Like, how do you actually do that?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah,
I've just,
absolutely, absolutely.
you go log in and you're like, all right, here's the stuff that you have. And you're like, that's what you get to pick from.
Yeah, yeah. Let, let,
Mom
let,
says you can pick one thing from the store. And it's like, oh, I can only
all right,
buy the stuff that's at the store.
all right.
And you're telling me
So,
I can buy stuff at other stores.
so let me give you a quick
Yeah.
education. So usually,
Yeah.
what happens is you have to and it's different from employer, right? So your employer will say, okay,
Mm,
you can open up this 401k with us. We'll match you if you put a certain amount of your pre-earned dollars in there. And then sometimes they'll say, okay, you cannot take this money out of this account until you reach retirement of age, right? So once you reach retirement age, you can take out that money from that 401k without it being a taxable event.
mm.
Roll that in and you can put that into a self-directed IRA, which is very similar to a 401k with like Fidelity, but it may be a
Okay.
self-directed custodian. Like I really like, it's on the tip of my tongue, Equity Trust. They're one of the biggest players out there, for example.
Okay.
Now you have your money with Equity Trust and you say, okay, Equity Trust, I want to put $300,000 and go buy this multifamily. So the same thing that you do with your money
Okay.
in the stock market, you say, okay, I want to buy,
Hmm.
$300,000 worth of Gillette stock. Now you could take that money and say, okay, I want to go buy this multifamily, right? And they will
Okay.
facilitate the purchase. And now the self-directed IRA will own that rental property. And so now you get all of the benefits of the appreciation. All of the income is tax free, right? And the income goes back into the self-directed IRA. So then now you say, okay, now I have this multifamily within my self-directed IRA, and I still have a couple $1 million in there. I want to go lend to Michael's debt fund because Michael is going to use that money to go buy recovery homes. And that makes me feel good that he's helping people with recovery. I know people in my family that have dealt with that. And then Michael's going to pay me 18% on that money. So then every month that money is going back into your self-directed IRA. So it's very similar to retirement accounts. It's still a retirement account. It just gives you the opportunity to invest in alternatives. Now, what tends to happen is, again, let's say someone can't move their money into a self-directed IRA. They've been matching and they've been, accumulating money in their 401k. They can either go out and create a self-directed IRA, which then sometimes there's a cap. I think they allow you to put like $7,000 into the self-directed IRA a year. Or what tends to happen oftentimes is, let's say you leave your job, right? That 401k will go with you. And a lot of people will just roll it into their 401k at their new job. But what you now have the ability to do, instead of rolling it into a 401k, you can take those funds and now roll it into a self-directed IRA, because now it's not a
Okay.
taxable event because now you're no longer with the company.
Right.
And that's how I started to learn about the self-directed IRA years ago, before I even got into real estate. It wasn't until I got into real estate I really started to understand, oh, wow, I can invest in, real estate. I could lend to a friend that's starting a business. I can invest in crypto, right? I can invest in Russian racehorses, right? There are just some types of rules where I can't lend to my son or I can't lend to my brother, right? It has to be some type of separation. And that's what we're really trying to educate our network about is, hey, you have this powerful tool at your disposal. And oftentimes people just don't realize it, right? So I'll tell people, hey, like if you have equity in your property, yeah, you could take the equity out and, go invest it, but put it into a self-directed IRA first, unless
Right.
you want the cash flow now, but you can leverage those tax saving benefits and really, really grow your wealth that way. So very similar what you do. They just use the term alternatives.
Yeah, I appreciate you breaking that down because we were talking about this last week where when we first moved to LA, the company I got hired with, they were employee owned. And as I was hearing you talk right now, I was thinking, man, I wish I would have known this about 8 years ago. Because when soon after I left that employee owned company, they announced that they had sold. And so all the employees that had basically shares or equity in the company ended up getting cashed out. And it was set up as a retirement instrument. That was kind of the intent behind it. And so I ended up getting notified how much I was going to get. And at the time, it was, almost a year's worth of salary. I was like, well, this is amazing. And I was like, do I roll this over? What do I do with all this money? I wasn't expecting to get it at all. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take the tax hit. I'm going to pull that out and I'm going to put that towards a multifamily. And that's what I ended up doing. So I ended up paying a tax hit on that you're telling me I could have completely avoided. And so I'm kind of exposing myself here in my own like ignorance about that at that time. And, realizing that cost me like thousands of dollars in money that I'd paid there that I didn't have to. And so definitely expensive lesson that I'm sitting here just learning it right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's really one of the powerful things with stuff like what you're doing is there are so many things out there where people can either leverage their money or not have to pay as much, and help themselves financially one way or the other. It's sometimes just small stuff like you're going to buy something, you find it online, and then just going to look to see if there's like a discount code somewhere. Like sometimes just small stuff like I want to buy this thing. Is there some way I can buy it for a lower price? That might be out there, but I didn't see it right away, and taking that extra little step or hearing about stuff like this. There's so many things out there that people just don't know about. They're just not aware, educated of them. They miss out and it can cost them thousands and thousands of dollars. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate what you're doing
Yeah. Thank you.
because
Thank you.
I'm learning stuff here right now.
Yeah, yeah. And, to your point, that's why we encourage people to, go to personal development, go to workshops, because you hear so many things that oftentimes the information that we receive, traditional information, especially from like financial planners, and I'm not trying to bash financial planners, is usually they're incentivized to share with you
Mm.
their products and not something like the self-directed IRA, right? Because they can't really make money on it. And rightfully so. It makes sense, right? They have to make a living too. So why do you think retirement capital often aligns better with like passive investments than active ones?
Well, one is if it's passive, can you just clarify so that I know, and for anyone else that's maybe listening, the difference of how you're describing passive and active investments?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So a passive investment, like you said, is maybe you may lend to someone that has a debt fund and they're going to pay you a
Okay.
consistent return, maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, maybe annually.
Yeah.
Versus more like active ones is maybe you buying your own rental property and then you have to self manage it, right?
Mm,
Or maybe you take your money and you invest in a restaurant that you have to spin up and run and manage and generate that active income. Or, you
got
put it
it.
into a business that you're starting or you go out and you start your own consulting firm, right? That's an
Right.
investment that you're investing in the business, but it's more active because, you have to kind of eat what you kill versus where you set it and forget it in like a stock or some type
Yeah.
of real estate
Okay. So then, and your question was why passive
aligns
approaches
better
are better for
for
aligns
like
better for
retirement.
retirement. Okay.
Capital, yeah,
Sure. Okay.
specifically.
Perfect. Perfect. For me, the passive works so much better because, especially as someone tends to get older, I mean, there's just different things where health, how you want to spend your time. If you've got a family, you want to spend time with your grandkids, things like that, just how you want to use your time, energy levels, like different things. And this isn't to say that, like, hey, once someone hits retirement age, their body's completely broken down, they have no energy. Like, there's definitely plenty of people that have lots of energy, very healthy, all sorts of things. And some of them really thrive on being in the mix and wanting to do that sort of investment stuff. Some of them kind of feed on that. But there's also plenty that they want to go spend time, with their grandkids or, they got doctor's appointments. They got whatever the heck else they want to do with their time in their life than managing something. And having something passive can give you that peace of mind that without me having to get up every day, like the money I'm having coming in is not dependent on whether or not I get up and make that happen. What I end up doing is my role shifts, and I now have enabled that thing to happen. And it's a small but important distinction from like you directly making it happen to you enabling it to happen. So, I've invested in this multifamily property in a different state. I could choose to try to manage that from a distance. That's going to be very difficult, probably not very advised. I can also contract with the property manager, let them manage that for me, pay them a percentage of it, and say, okay, you all handle that. You and I work together to get clear and, have agreement on rents and how we're going to do things, what you're going to come to me for, what things you can do on your own. We'll have some understanding there, probably even have that in writing in a contract. And now that becomes a passive investment. And so the line between those things can be very, very thin, just whether or not I have a property manager there. Same thing, like you mentioned, having a restaurant or people do this with like car washes or laundromats, different types of businesses that they might invest in. Like ATMs and vending machines has been one that people have talked about, just using some examples where maybe I've done that for a while, and maybe I even brought that down to being a part-time thing. And maybe at some point I switched that and it's now worth it for me to hire someone else to go and do that. And that might even be like hire my grandson as they're in high school and wanting to make a few bucks and get a little bit of experience. Hey, you know what? I can have you go out and do my route, go out and do this stuff, give you some experience. It helps me. It's a win-win situation. So, it can be ways to even help your own family in stuff like that, which often is important for folks, especially at that stage in their careers, in their life. And so that passive, it's really about enabling that money and being able to kind of like leverage it, leverage the money and leverage your time. And I think that's
I like how you use the example of vending machines and having your kids do that. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. And to your point, there's so many different ways. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, too. It depends on what your goals are and what you want when it comes to that passive versus active. What would you say is a good passive investment today?
uh, again, kind of depends on like how much what your appetite for risk is and what you want to do. I mean, probably I would say one of the still, even with all the things that happened in the market, real estate is still probably one of like the number one asset classes that's out there, for a few fundamental reasons, like especially if we're talking about like the American real estate market. It's a really huge market. So there's a lot of diversity. If you want, whether for whatever reason you're interested in investing in commercial stuff, you're interested in investing in land, like residential stuff, there's a lot of diversity there, different geographic areas, depending on what you want. Like when we bought our multifamily, for instance, I intentionally chose to buy one that was outside of a major military base. And that for me was a strategic move because I recognize that those big bases are anchors in that economy. And if you're a state like Texas with a base like Fort Hood, politically, it's going to be nearly impossible to shut that base down. Like, one, it supports so many people, and it's such a fixture that to relocate all that's ridiculously costly. But also, what politician wants to allow that many jobs and that amount of economic support to disappear out of their area? They're going to
So
fight like
smart.
tooth and nail to keep that.
So smart.
So it's like you've got a political leverage there. You've got built-in demand. So even in a recession, people still need a place to stay. They're still going to be soldiers. They're still going to want to go out, buy cars. They're going to need haircuts. They're going to go to places to eat. They're going to go to Walmart and go do their shopping. Like, they're going to do all the same sort of things. And it's going to help keep that economy afloat, even when all the other areas around it are struggling a bit more. And so that even becomes an opportunity for folks when it comes to looking for stuff to invest in. So you have that US real estate still in short terms, it kind of goes up and down, but the track record's been pretty good for the last several decades. On the whole, which is really how I suggest looking at it, is long-term trends. On the whole, it increases. Tax benefits certainly are there. We've got a pretty well-established tax system around real estate. The tax system incentivizes investment, giving people tax breaks, allowing people to write off a lot of stuff. And I think probably the biggest thing is just knowing, not trying to go in too far, not trying to buy more than you can handle and get yourself overextended. So with each of the properties I had, for each property itself, I had a separate savings account for that property that would have a certain, few months worth of the payment sitting in there. So if I had a tenant that missed a couple of payments, someone I had to maybe go through the eviction process, or I had repairs that needed to happen, I had a separate fund that was able to just cover that. And then once I got that back up and running, I would take some of the proceeds, put that back and replenish that fund so that the property became more self-sufficient. And, then those purchases I had to make, those end up getting to be write-offs. If I had to pay for a repair, if I've got lost rent for a month, when I go to see my accountant at the end of the year, we get to square up. And so that was part of also like insulating that financially to give me more peace of mind and not put the property at risk.
As we begin to wrap up, I just had a couple more questions. What
Yeah.
advice would you give someone sitting on a large retirement account who feels stuck with like traditional options?
I think I would really just go back to what I was saying earlier of number one, you just got to figure out like what is it that you really want? Which is a really easy but sometimes extremely difficult question. Like, what is it that's really important to you? Because let's say you've got a few $1,000,000 sitting in your retirement account. If we're talking big, like I'm thinking like at least north of $1,000,000, probably if we're talking like big, million plus. Okay. If I'm sitting on that and, I can do some pretty simple like kitchen table math here and say, all right, if I'm retiring, let's say I'm retiring around 65 or so. Life expectancy, men right now, life expectancy is right around 78, 76, 78. Women get a few more years of life expectancy. They tend to do less dumb things that cause them to get taken out sooner. So they get a few more years. So maybe early 80s typically. So if we're looking at that 65, you're looking at maybe give or take around 15 years, 12, 15, 18 years if you're kind of right there in line with the majority. Of course, you got some outliers, some that go sooner, some that go later. But on the whole, you're looking about 15 to maybe 20 years. So what's your monthly overhead look like, at that age? If your mortgage is paid off, you've got your expenses pretty low, probably got maybe a car that's paid off. Your expenses aren't that high. Depending on where you're living in the country, maybe a couple $1,000 a month. And you got Social Security, whatever that may be for you coming in. So how much do you actually need per year? And on how many years that you're looking to probably live, how much do you actually need? Like that becomes a question. So like one of the things that I've heard happens regularly with folks in that position is they literally just end up passing away with a bunch of money that they never spent, partly because they're afraid to spend it, and also partly because they end up having way more than they're going to spend because they're not going out buying Louis Vuitton and buying like Maybachs and going on luxury vacations. Like you might go on a couple of nice vacations, but their lifestyle doesn't all of a sudden fundamentally change like that. Like it just doesn't really happen. So they have a lot, great, but then what do you do with it? So at that point, if you've got a lot, I would be looking myself is if I have a family, how do I make sure that money is set up for legacy to be able to pass that on? Or if I don't have a family, if that's not something that's in my cards, are there any sort of causes where I might want to self-direct that in a will, in a trust, where I might want to have that money go. So similar to what you were saying about self-directed, I can still self-direct those funds after I've passed away. So if I want to look ahead now, like I'm a veteran, so maybe for some veteran, they want to support a local American Legion post, or they want to support the USO, or, something like that. If you're really passionate about animals, if there's some cause and you say, I've worked so freaking hard to build up all this money, I'm not going to use it all. I'm going to enjoy my life while I have. And you know what? From whatever's left, I want 25% of that to go over to the ASPCA to go help animals or whatever that is. Hey, good for you. And that might help you sleep better at night, knowing that your money, you did all that work and it's not just going to go to the state. So that's probably where my head would be at.
I love it. I love
What
it.
do I really need? Yeah.
And then what type of conversations do you think more investors should be having around retirement capital, if any?
Just, I think the idea that the traditional approach of just save your entire life and then hope that you have enough when you get to retirement is kind of, I would say, the traditional approach that a lot of folks take. And it's certainly maybe the right one for a lot of people, but it's also not the only approach. And so I think similar to what you were saying, like educating me about self-directed IRAs is just having that curiosity to go and learn about other approaches, just being open-minded to other ways of doing things. Because it's so easy of like, this is what I know, this is what feels safe and comfortable, and to just stick with that. And everything else seems way too speculative and risky, and you're just going to lose all your money. And granted, there's plenty of stuff out there that is. And so, like, there's a healthy amount of skepticism. Like, absolutely, I wouldn't discourage someone from approaching anything with skepticism. At the same time, like, not having that swing over to the point of being closed-minded about things. So being open-minded towards, self-directed IRAs, investing in alternative things, because because it's called alternative doesn't mean it's a scam. But there are a lot of scams that will call themselves alternative. So it's like
Yeah.
both are true. It's
Yeah.
like both are true, and so it just comes, you just got to be willing to put in the work. And if you don't want to put in the work and the effort to go and learn about all that, then hey, just be honest with yourself and say, hey, you know what? I want to stay in my comfort zone. This is what I know, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this and ride it till I die. Then hey, props to you, man. Like props to you for being honest. I'm not going to hate on you for that. I'm not going to hate on you one bit for doing that. You got to do what's right for you.
Absolutely. Tony, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and wisdom and experience. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure the audience will as well. For those listening now, watching live, or for those who are watching the replay, if this conversation resonated, please share it with someone who's built success and is now thinking more intentionally about how to deploy their capital. And if you're serious about the self-directed IRAs, how it can be used for passive real estate backed lending, you'll find some resources in the description. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of Deploy. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
You've been watching the Deployed podcast, where we deploy insight, capital, and growth.